Hi! In this video, I'm going to talk about how solution-focused hypnotherapy can help you to move yourself away from obsessive or intrusive thoughts. I'm Orla Kirby, I'm a therapist, and I specialise in helping people to move themselves away from anxiety, particularly severe anxiety, and also OCD. Okay, so solution-focused hypnotherapy was the first modality that I trained in, and I think it's really helpful to understand different therapies and to know how they work, right? So I'm going to talk about solution-focused hypnotherapy in the sense of pure solution-focused hypnotherapy. So if you went to someone who was a solution-focused hypnotherapist, this is what they would be offering, right? And the thing with solution-focused hypnotherapy is it is very much a formula. It's a really great formula, right? I don't mean that as a criticism. It's a super highly effective formula. At the same time, compared to many other forms of therapy, it follows a really specific process each time. And of course, that's going to vary a bit with the client themselves, with whatever they're bringing, with the personality and the thoughts and the background of the therapist. So I'm not saying there's no variation, but part of how it works is the repetition and is kind of quite a structured layout. And so in a way that makes it easier for me to tell you about this than it would be with some of the other kinds of therapy that I practice. Okay. So solution-focused therapy would always begin with a big old talk about the brain. Sorry, just getting rid of something here. And this is a talk that might take 45 minutes. It might take an hour. It might take an hour and a half, depending on the client, how much questions they've got. And I've actually put together kind of a free resource, which is a version of this talk about information on the brain and how that relates to anger, anxiety, depression. And you can find that at orlakirby.com / how your brain works. So yeah, you could go and watch that or listen to that, and that would give you pretty much the same information as a client going to any solution-focused therapist would get in their first session, right? The reason why there's so much focus on it at the beginning is that it takes a while to allow that information to seep into your mind, right? So there's a lot of detail at the beginning, but it's something that's returned to in session after session after session. And it's helpful because it allows you to understand, okay, well, why am I having these intrusive thoughts, these obsessive thoughts? What is my brain doing there? And first of all, by understanding something, there can be a lot less fear, a lot less anxiety around that. Often people can be experiencing a real sense of either shame or fear or just confusion, just bewilderment over, well, why am I having these thoughts? What's going on? So understanding where that's all come from is huge in terms of immediately alleviating how you're feeling about it. And that all makes it a bit clearer and a bit easier also to see, oh, okay, well, it makes sense then that this is something that would work, right? So this is something that I love about solution-focused therapy, is it's very transparent, right? So it's not, a therapist sitting over here with a notebook, and asking you mysterious things or just being silent. And then, you don't quite know, what are they writing down or what are they doing? What's going on here? It's very, very much like, here's how the brain works. Here's why and how solution-focused therapy is so effective. And, we can explain every step of the way. You can kind of see the ins and outs of it. It all makes sense logically, right? Yeah, so like I say, it's probably impossible to explain in detail all that information about the brain here, but you could go to orlakirby.com / how your brain works to find out a bit more about that. Very briefly, a lot of it is around how we have these different parts of our mind. So the cortex being the kind of more sophisticated part of our brain, the part that comes from later on in evolution, and that houses all of our creativity. So that ability we have to have this thought over here and this idea or memory over here, and then merge them together and make a new thing that is happening in your cortex. All of your language skills or any complex skill is housed in your cortex. Your rational thinking, your problem solving, that is all going on in your cortex. And also your compassion. So your ability to imagine your way into someone else's life in a complex way, that's also, based in your cortex. So a lot of really amazing resource and complex activity happening here in your cortex. And there's another part of your brain, of your mind, which you might have heard called the lizard brain or the chimp brain. It's kind of early mind that comes from an earlier stage in evolution. And this part of our mind is great too, right? And does loads of really important, great stuff. So it's really important, I think, not to do down this part of our mind. It is true that it is the part of our mind that is responsible for depression, anxiety, OCD, people having aggravated anger issues. That does come from that part of the brain, so it can get a bit of a bad name for that reason. But actually, this is simply a muddle, right? It's not that part of our brain is out to get us or anything. It's just, there's been a muddle and a confusion in terms of how the brain is working. And solution-focused hypnotherapy is all about shifting your brain into a different way of working, where that part of the brain is doing its kind of more of its kind of normal everyday tasks, right? Helping to run the body, helping to make memories, helping to construct deep bonds and maintain those bonds with people. It has all these really important jobs to do when it's not kind of very engaged in fight or flight all the time, which it isn't designed to do, right? So ideally we want the primitive brain only going into fight or flight if it's a genuinely dangerous threat to life, right? So most of the time it's ideal to have the cortex more in charge and more leading the decision making and our thought processes. So it's a very, very brief overview. But like I say, if you want the detail on that, go to orlakirby.com/how your brain works, because there's a lot more detail there. So your first session then, a solution-focused therapy, you get all this wonderful information about the brain. And often people are really blown away by that, right? Often people are, saying, oh, how did I not know this? How did no one teach me this my whole life? And this changes everything. Or, now I understand why I'm having those thoughts or why I'm having these feelings. And that makes it so much easier, even right now. Very recently, someone I'm working with said to me, now I feel like it's sort of outable, right? This is fixable. I have that belief now that this is something that can be fixed because you've explained to me about my brain and how it's doing this instead of this, and how the certain processes we can go through to shift it more into this mode of working, and that feels like a thing that can be done, right? That's like a training process I can go through. I feel like I can commit to that, and it makes me feel very hopeful and kind of really practical about it, right? Like it's something that can just be shifted and fixed and altered, right? Not that I don't mean in terms of people being fixed, right? But just that you can shift into a different way of using your mind, right? So that's the first session. Then all of the sessions afterwards follow this kind of process or formula. The first part of that being, a question around, if you look back over the last week, the last 7 days, what's been good, right? Now, some therapists would just be asking you to kind of draw on your memories. I pretty much always ask people to write things down as they go along in the week, because I just find it makes this part of the session go so much easier. That's what one of my trainers suggested. As I say, different trainers do this differently. Different therapists do this differently. But I really like that, getting people to write down every day. I go for 10 good things, right? Because I just think that stretches you a bit. It pushes you a bit. If you go for 3 good things, people tend more to kind of say very general things like, it's good that I have a house to live in, and it's good. I'm glad I've got my family or something, right? And actually, what we're looking for here in these good things is more specific, detailed, particular experiences. It doesn't have to be huge things. It can be very small things that have happened. It can just be like, had a nice lunch, saw this person who I like talking to, very small things, but almost to be kind of re-experiencing them as you write them down. It doesn't have to take a long time, about 10 minutes. This is just good thing. Can be good for you, good for someone else. it doesn't have to be entirely brilliant anyway. Sometimes these are sort of what was good in this challenging situation. What am I proud of about myself in terms of how I handled this quite challenging thing that was happening, right? It can also be memories of the past, or, daydreams about the future, or plans that you've made for next week. So it's quite broad, this good things, right? And how this works in terms of helping you to shift away from intrusive thoughts is that it changes your whole focus and your whole edit of the world, really, of reality. So I know it sounds quite big for such a simple activity, but it's amazing how effective this is if you really commit to it and you do it every day for a couple of months. It's going to shift the way that you are perceiving everything, because we're anyway making an edit, right? As I walk down any street, I am not possibly able to take in everything, right? Absolutely everything that's happening, everyone that's there, all of the signs on all of the shops, all of the, too much, right? So I'm editing, I'm giving more priority to certain pieces of data. And unfortunately, if my early mind, if that kind of lizard brain, it's very focused on survival, has a bit too much of the upper hand, if my stress levels are a bit too high, I'm going to be, more drawn towards focusing in that edit on, things that are associated with negative emotion in order to protect myself, right? And what this good things list does is that, as I'm walking along the street, part of my brain knows, I'm going to have to write that list later. So I'm going to be deliberately looking out for good things, right? A little bit more than I would be normally. And the impact and the effect of that grows. It also lets people have more awareness of what is good in their life and what they appreciate, what's important to them. And sometimes can lead to different decisions about, I'll do more of that. I'll put in more of that. I'll allow more room for that in my life, either consciously or unconsciously. So there's a lot of shifting around thought processes that happens with that really simple task. And it's actually enhanced by then, at the end of the week, going and seeing your therapist and talking about this stuff, right? And then maybe some exploratory questions then around, tell me more about this thing, and, so that you can really reach into what's important to you and how that links up with other things in your life. And there can be some kind of gentle investigative work designed to, really coax you towards appreciating yourself, being proud of yourself, really connecting with what it is that you're interested in and fascinated by and drawn to, and what you may have been drawn to in the past or what you'd love to do in the future. So connecting with yourself in this way is really powerful, and very different from the kind of thinking you would be doing when you're engaging in, kind of repeating negative thoughts. So very powerful, that part of the session. Then the next part, the kind of almost middle part of the session, the middle part of the talking part, I should say. So a solution focused therapy session, probably should have said this at the beginning, is kind of divided into two. So you have a half hour of talking work and then a half hour of hypnosis, or kind of meditative. It's really very similar to meditation. You're going into a relaxed, focused, calm state. And that first talking part of the session is generally divided into three. The first part being this, what's been good things, and then development of that. The middle part being what's called revision, which is where the therapist goes over information about the brain again. So it's kind of returning to that knowledge and understanding of how the mind works, how the brain works, and how we can influence that, how we can work with that. And then relating that probably to something that's come out of the good things, right? Or sometimes someone might need to talk about a challenge. We don't go into challenges and problems too much in solution focused therapy, but sometimes something will have come up, and then it might be that is related to, some of the workings of the brain, right? Particularly if something just very challenging has happened for someone, it might be really difficult not to mention it at all, right? And it might be not sensible to. So, in that case, it can be useful to have the context of, okay, well, what's going on in the mind then? What's going on in the brain? So that's kind of just a repeating, really. It literally is repeating a small part of the information on the brain, because it's just so helpful to hear it again and again. So if you do go and download this thing, you go to orlakirby.com/how your brain works. My advice to you would be to listen to it a few times, right? Really let it sink in. Maybe go and explain it to someone else because again, that really helps you to take in that information at a deep level. It's ideal to really know this at an unconscious level as well as at a conscious level, because that is going to shift your responses and your reactions when you encounter stress, when you're in a difficult or challenging situation. Okay, so that's the first two bits then, kind of what's been good and development of that, the revision of the brain stuff. And then the last kind of third of this talking part of the session is more kind of imaginative and creative and focused on the future. So, so I often think of a solution focused therapy talking part as being kind of like immediate past, kind of present, or, stuff about the brain, and then future towards the end. So this is where there are specific questions, and I might do a whole other video on this because it's complicated, but designed, it's the miracle question and then related questions developed from that. And this miracle question work is designed to really open up your mind so that you can think positively and creatively about the future. And we start with the immediate future. So it's going to be next week, right? And the questioning process, which again, I think I'll make a whole other video on the miracle question because it's too complex to go into here probably. But they're specific questions that are designed to almost bypass or go straight through resistance that you might have to change, right? Or to change being possible. So they're strange questions. They get you to think in odd ways and quite laterally, and they're very kind of mind expanding ways of thinking. And you can't predict in advance what's going to happen. It's very much a kind of a thought experiment. And I should have mentioned that before that there's a scaling part where you take someone through a scaling and you can scale on happiness or confidence, maybe be the main ones, but you can scale on anything. You can scale on self-love if that was a really important thing for someone to work on. And you'd basically say to the person, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 1 is the least happy you could possibly be and 10 is the most happy you could possibly be, where would you put yourself right now? And at the beginning, you might scale on lowest and highest over the last 2 weeks as well. And then, so that is the basis. It starts from there, from mood. And there's a kind of imaginative work around imagining that mood shifting towards maybe more where you want it to be, or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be mood. It could be something else. But where the thing that it is that you want to be moving towards, it allows your mind, the whole of your brain, to come together in this relaxed way and create an imagining of that having shifted forwards. Maybe not a huge amount, maybe just slightly, just a little bit happier, just a small amount calmer, just that little bit more confident. What would that be like? And then how could you move yourself a very small amount that way next week, right? And this can be very simple things. So some people might start off with just, I'd do some yoga, or I'd go for a walk, or maybe I'd play the piano. I haven't done that for a while, or but over time, the more you do this work, the more it becomes quite deep things, quite complicated things. Sometimes the simple things are really important. I'm not trying to dismiss that, right? Simple things that are great for you that you repeat could be really helpful. But sometimes it can be, I think I might leave my husband, or I think I might leave my job, or start a new career, or go and retrain as this thing, or because it more and more your mind is opening up to different possibilities and different routes. Not that I'm saying that a major life change is always necessary or what someone wants, but there can be quite major shifts in people's relationship with their future through doing this process. And sometimes it might shift to more like what you want things to be like in 6 months or a year or 5 years. Okay, so that's kind of the talking part of it. That's what the talking work is all about. And the first time people go through that talking process, sometimes they're a bit confused or a bit like, it seems a bit simple to really work, or you're asking me very strange questions because it's a different way of talking. It's a different way of communicating, quite deliberately, because it's shifting you into thinking in a different way. Some people do have a really great feeling right afterwards, but not necessarily, right? And particularly if anxiety or stress levels are very high, it's not necessarily going to change something overnight. It's more the repeated process, the repeated going through this quite structured process that is very cleverly designed to shift you into a whole different way of using your mind, where you are accessing that cortex more, right? So the good things shifts your edit, changes the way you're processing data, changes your whole outlook to be focusing more on the things that are important to you, the things that light you up, right? Kind of subtly, gently over time. The brain stuff gives you an awareness of how your brain is working, and a sense of knowing yourself and confidence in the process, and a strong belief in the possibility of change. Yeah, as well as just a genuine understanding of what's actually happening, which makes everything less frightening and more reassuring. And like, you know where you're going, right? And then the more creative kind of future stuff at the end, it is amazing for just shifting you into a whole other way of being, where your cortex is really fully alive at that point. If you're positively imagining the future in a way that feels great, you're very active in your cortex, right? That is basically, that kind of thinking is the complete opposite of anxiety or anxious thinking, or certainly the very, very opposite of repeating negative thoughts or obsessive thoughts or intrusive thoughts, right? Because it's thinking that's kind of spreading and reaching like this way and that way, and you're using your whole mind together. The whole of your brain will be lighting up at once. And that is very, very different to, an obsessive or intrusive thought, where it's the same thought kind of cycling around again and again and again. This thing. And it's, in that case, your brain being kind of led around by that early mind, having sent everything into a kind of fight or flight state, right? So very, very different ways of using your mind. And you're very gently led into it in that talking process, both within the session and through multiple sessions. So that's the talking part. And then after all of that wonderful change happening in your brain, the ideal thing to kind of bed in that change and, sort of gently allow that to really seep into your unconscious as well as your conscious mind, to embed those changes and ways of thinking, is to do hypnosis. Because this is what hypnosis does, right? Any kind of learning that we do, if we then go into a relaxed state, it's going to embed that learning. This is like, you might have heard of, if you're doing an exam, looking at your cards just before you go to sleep, for example. It's a similar kind of process. Of course, hypnosis is so valuable in and of itself for moving away from, intrusive thoughts, because, you're actually teaching your mind to relax. It's another way of becoming really active in your whole mind, because you're going into this relaxed, focused state where your whole mind is involved in this beautiful, calm way. So, in and of itself, even if you just practice hypnosis and did nothing else, it would help, right? It would go some way towards helping you move yourself away from intrusive thoughts. At the same time, the use of it within this solution-focused hypnotherapy session is the general relaxation and lowering stress levels, shifting to a calmer state, but it's also to really embed very deeply the new patterns of thought, the new structures and systems of thought, the new thought pathways that you've built during that talking part. So it's very, very powerful. And the whole thing together is a beautiful experience to go through. Generally, people feel great at the end. Yeah, if not after the first session, 4 or 5 sessions in, people are generally leaving feeling, light, energized, wonderful. It's not the kind of therapy that you come out of weeping generally, right? I'm not saying that would never happen, because sometimes something very heavy can just come up, right? But it's not structured for that, right? It's structured towards shifting you into a whole different way of thinking, and then putting you into this wonderful relaxed state where you can really embed that way of thinking that's really great for your mind. So really powerful stuff. And it's a very gentle way of shifting your mind. What I found with the other kinds of therapy that I now bring into my work as well, so like NLP and timeline therapy, is that for certain people and for certain situations, it can really help to move things a lot more quickly, or to get through particular areas or issues more powerfully, more speedily, right? Which I really appreciate. At the same time, I'm always wanting to work the way the client wants to work. So, different personalities are different, and different people want to go at a different pace, and that's fine. So in my next couple of videos, I'll be going through those other techniques, the NLP and the timeline therapy, and I'll see you in the next video.